Welcome to Strategy Execution Unlocked and the sixth episode in our Practitioners Unfiltered series. In this series, we sit down with the founding members of the Strategy Execution Forum, practitioners spanning diverse roles, functions, and industries, all united by a common mission, helping their organizations to effectively bridge the gap between strategy and execution. Through these candid, unfiltered conversations, we explore real-world challenges these leaders face and the innovative solutions they're implementing to master both the art and science of strategy execution. Today, I'm really excited to welcome Lou Santana to the show. Lou is a seasoned enterprise leader with over 20 years worth of experience in portfolio and program management, M&A, strategy execution, and large-scale business transformation. He has driven complex initiatives across multiple industries, including automotive, retail, building products, consumer goods, and telecommunications. He specializes in aligning enterprise strategy with disciplined execution through effective PMO leadership, capital deployment, and cross-functional transformational programs, often serving as the key bridge between executive vision and operational delivery. He is also a council and founding member of the Strategy Execution Forum and is helping us build the community to elevate strategy execution to a true C-suite imperative. Lou, thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you for that wonderful introduction. Very pumping me up, but yes, very happy to be here. Very excited to be invited to the Strategy Execution Council, and this is definitely a passionate topic of mine, as you know, and looking forward to our Q&A here.
So, we always start with this question because I think it's important, because strategy execution can mean different things to different people, especially based on industry, based on their specific role within the organization. So what does strategy execution mean to you?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think in the roles I've had, the talking past each other and what these things mean and are interpreted is so important. And the word strategy, just taking a step back, the strategy is a word that means a lot to, or means different things to everybody, right? And one of the things I think that we're trying to do is bring a consistency and discipline to something that's usually done ad hoc, right? And so when I think of strategy execution, I think of it as part of strategy, right? There's three big buckets of strategy. Strategy formulation, which is the one most of the people think about. Strategy translation, which is the one nobody thinks about, or very limited people think about. And strategy execution, which is, you know, the taking action, or really the deployment of what you're saying you want to do with your strategy, right? And so those are like the three big buckets that happen. And as you can see, when you start to try to systematize that in a way, as I mentioned, that middle piece is it's hard to execute on strategy when it's not translated properly. And sometimes you see that gap happen when the teams are trying to have strategic initiatives. They're not clearly aligned with the strategy. And it's really that, I think, going to another question of not just what strategy execution is, but like where's the gap and where is some of the issues, is that piece is really decomposing those three buckets. Who owns those three buckets, and what are like the main outcomes of the three buckets, right? Strategy formulation is a lot of, you know, where do we play, how to win, what do we want to do, you know, do we want to go into a new category, do we want to expand into geographies and things like that. That's straightforward to many people, right? It's then how do you take that PowerPoint that's presented in all nice package that everybody knows, oh, we have this great deck and presentation, to how do you translate it into action? And I think that's where there's a lot of challenges. I think there's no clear ownership of who's supposed to do that in many organizations. It's really relied upon senior leaders to kind of say, okay, you know, take this and run with it, right? And right there's variation from the get-go. Many leaders do it in a different way. Some of it's very, you know, some leaders are great, you know, very good at organizing and how do I cascade this down to the teams and build bodies of work. And some of them are more just informal. And so that lack of consistency right at the top of the house, I think, is a gap. I think because what happens is the teams downstreams that are trying to help work it are getting pulled in different directions. There's competing priorities. There's different ways people talk about the work. And so all that overlap causes confusion, causes chaos, causes frustration downstream. And so to me, I think that's one of the value adds of thinking about this in a disciplined way, and then having a group really own the discipline within an organization is valuable. And I think maybe sometimes the organizations don't truly understand it, but they do see cross-functional dysfunction in a way. And so they are a lot, over the past 15 years, I would say a lot more strategy execution offices or EPMOs are coming about to try to work that cross-functional coordination across the C-suite. And I think the other key thing that I want to bring about is almost every strategy is a business strategy that's cross-functional by nature. How organizations are set up are functional in nature. And so when those two things intersect, there's often challenges right off. We're not set up by, hey, let's go fix the strategy and the whole team is all organized around this one thing. It's not. We need to fix this as a team, and we're going across this horizon to fix something cross-functionally, but then they're also focused on their job, right? And what they have to do. And so aligning across that is a challenge for sure.
Absolutely.
That's where the value of some of the EPMO or strategy execution offices really help cut through, and I call it herding the cats, right? Herding the cats to stay on task for the common vision.
Yeah, and obviously you know this because we've been working on this together within the forum itself. But when we think about some of those big challenges, right? The first is is there C-suite buy-in to this is a critical discipline that needs to be developed in the organization. And then we talk about, the next one, it taking a village, which goes back to the kind of herding the cats, right? That you've got all these different functions in the organization that ultimately need to collaborate more effectively to build a cohesive operating model to execute on the strategy. And that needs some organization and top-down commitment. It kind of amazes me, and one of the reasons we established the Strategy Execution Forum in the first place is that there's been such significant investment over the last 10, 20, 30 years in process improvements and obviously tooling as the technology has improved to do a better job of this, but yet the needle hasn't moved that much, right? And one of the things or probably the main thing we're trying to achieve at the Strategy Execution Forum is elevating strategy execution to become a C-suite priority or a C-suite imperative. From your perspective, do you think the C-suite generally understand what strategy execution is? You said strategy is a vague word, execution is also a vague word. But do you think they understand the actual cost to them in terms of suboptimal strategy execution capabilities?
I would say yes, they are starting to. I think, 15, 20 years ago, I don't. But I think as, our generation and my generation have got older and into those positions, they understand the value of having a structured approach to something, right? A systemized approach to something. Whereas 20 years ago, it was more, how do you not, just do it. Just do it, guys. What's the problem? And I think that's where it has come up the ways and up the spectrum. And where I think the still challenges, though, are truly understanding what it takes, right? Truly understanding, and I still face it today, even in my job, where, what does it really take to have strong strategic execution? How do I say it? It actually works, right? You actually are getting it. You're actually getting the deployment or getting the value. And there's a couple critical success factors, right? I think there's everybody understanding it and understanding the expectations of the different roles in the operating model or the framework. And that goes from sponsors and champions, and then how does the functional leads work together, as well as a PMO or whatever office you want to have, right? How those roles work together are critical. And I think sometimes there's a gap there, especially when it comes from the sponsorship level and even at the champion level, because there's a set of expectations or assumptions that are made that, oh yeah, I'm a sponsor. I kind of just, there's, how do I say this? Sponsors, true sponsorship is really you're helping drive, shape, and make decisions on this body of work, right? And sometimes if you're not getting that, the rest of the work isn't flowing, and they're expecting this, the team to drive it. I'm just kind of like, you report out on me, and so there's gaps there. So I think the roles and responsibilities are sometimes not understood, and if you don't have the air cover from the C-suite to push down on that ecosystem, it's a challenge. And so um, I do think they generally understand the concept and what they're trying to do. I think there's still some big gaps on exactly what does it take to make it work, and what do they need to do to provide the right air cover? What are the sponsors? When I say sponsors, I'm talking about, executive leaders, not a director. I'm talking about a senior vice president or a VP that where again, I'll go back to another challenge, just kind of most senior leaders are alphas by nature. That's what they are, okay? And that's okay. But sometimes when you have a bunch of alphas trying to operate within a framework, it's hard to keep them within the framework. And so that's another ending balance as well, right? You're trying to create a systemized approach telling an alpha to stay in the lane, and that's a challenge, right? But at the end of the day, how I've always tried to approach it is that it's for the benefit of everyone, right? It's for the benefit of you. If we all work within this ecosystem, it works for everybody. It makes your job easier, your team's job easier, and you're actually going to deliver and look good in driving what you're supposed to be driving if we do it this way, instead of just kind of the ad hoc shotgun approach.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so yeah, the sort of tagline of the Strategy Execution Forum is, elevating strategy execution to become a C-suite imperative, right? And actually, what the first principle in our 10 principles to master strategy execution is expose the cost of poor strategy execution capabilities, where we really need to ensure that the C-suite understand the implications of suboptimal strategy execution capabilities, that is actually impacting them from a value realization point of view, both loss of value and obviously delay or deferral
Yep.
of value. So I think, as you say, some understand this, but it's more about not necessarily understanding how to fix that, right? I mean, it's kind of an opaque machine of all these functions coming together that needs to be optimized to build that cohesive operating model. But ultimately, as we say in the forum, having got that C-suite buy-in in terms of what strategy execution is, and the value that it can help reclaim and accelerate to make it an imperative, right? The first right step, and you've alluded to this already, is to establish an enterprise function. We call it the Strategy Execution Office, but the name is almost irrelevant, to be able to unify the different functions, what we call village members, to be able to execute effectively. What's your experience in, one, getting the C-suite to buy into establishing that enterprise function? And then, what's the kind of lessons learned in setting that enterprise function up so it can be successful? I think you already touched on one of the gaps in terms of, the alpha execs that may not want to play ball
Yep.
in that unified world.
Yeah, I think it's getting the buy-in, and I've had to get at different levels of the organization buy-in on having a disciplined PMO and really more of like a strategic portfolio management approach and discipline that adds value, and really showing them it's to me, my world and the way I've always done it is trying to adapt the audience and keep it simple. What I'm good at is providing structure, bringing order from the chaos. So like understanding all these things you want to do, how do you just make this simple for them? How do you make this simple in the easiest, most digestible way, in a structured way? And just how do you do that, right? And really make it relatable for them. What do they care about? So they don't necessarily, what I've had to learn along the way is they don't care about all the projects and the requirements documents and all, things like that. They care about, what levers am I pulling? What are the KPIs? What are what's the big bodies of work that are going to drive these KPIs, and tying out that for them and in a package to make it real for them. That's how it's like, oh yeah, I like this, right? So then kind of get buy-in from just a nice, clean, structured approach to what I think you're saying. So it's kind of taking what they're saying and making sense of it for them in a structured way. That's one way. I think, you know, the lessons learned is that a couple of things. Sometimes people don't want that structure. They like just kind of doing it. So that's one thing. So you're dealing with that, but also it's getting everyone's alignment and commitment to understanding that, hey, if we do this structure, you're going to get this value. So what I've been trying to explain to them is I showcase the downstream frustrations of, like you just said, the boss is mad because nothing's moving. You guys have been working on this for 1 or 2 years. What's going on, right? Or I don't understand what I'm getting when. What is happening, right? And so simple questions coming from the top can be answered in some simple ways. So I'm trying to keep it simple. And to me, my main principles are bringing clarity and alignment on a couple elements. It's like my checkbox. So if we have clarity and alignment around strategic intent for the top, and then we have clarity and alignment on accountability and who's kind of driving the work and who's making and decision rights. A lot of times we fail on that. We're going round and round and round. There's unclear decision rights. I think clarity, alignment on the future state. We're off making plans. The boss says, I need this done, but we're not even aligned on what we're even trying to work on. We're just trying to solve a problem, but we're not aligned on even what the future state is. So that, and then it goes on and on more to the traditional, like, you know, do we have alignment on the phasing of the approach? Do we have alignment on the plan and the tech? So it's just a simple checklist of things that I try to use internally to bring to them where things are getting stuck or where things are misaligned. Because at the end of the day, it's either people aren't clear on what's going on or they're not aligned across each other. And that's where, at their level, that's where the things are getting stuck upstream. And so I try to remove the upstream blockers to the teams downstream doing the work and make sure that I call it everyone's rowing in the same direction, right? If everyone's rowing in the same direction, that suboptimal execution is removed. That wasted time and energy is removed. We're actually, it's already hard enough to do some of these projects people are working on, but it's that much harder and that much frustrating for everyone when there's misalignment along the way, right? So
Yeah,
I've tried to highlight that in a simple way is what I guess I'm trying to say.
yeah, and you use the word structure. Some would talk about governance, right? You know, and I think a lot of times that's where it falls down, right? When executives, you know, or people think about an enterprise PMO or some governing structure that's going to put some structure to the chaos, they think of overly bureaucratic governance processes, what I call sort of paint by numbers governance, which again, no one wants to be involved with or adhere to, right? Versus, you know, the right size governance processes that are like kind of brakes on a car that are designed to make you go faster, right? So it's got a guardrails to stay between that allow for a level of autonomy still within the different teams or the functions that need to come together, whether that's managing
Absolutely.
project work or whether that's managing the operational activity and spend relative to the strategy of the business. So talk a little bit about, if you can, about how rigid that structure should be.
It's a great point, and I'm a process guy too. So if you take away the PMO guy, I'm naturally a process improvement person, trained in Lean Six Sigma, and I'm always solving problems. And you can be very tactical and granular, right? In the different organizations I've worked in, I purposely use the word framework versus process on purpose, right? And so I think framework and having a freedom within a framework is, especially at a strategic level, is critical. You can't be so prescriptive on every little thing. And so I call it a minimum viable framework for strategy deployment. That's kind of in my current role. And it's a never ending balance, right? So too much freedom, then you don't get what you need, right? You don't have the consistency that you need to drive, harmonization across the functions, right? Too much, structure and discipline. That's where it's in the danger zone, right? What's the value add? What's the value? Why am I filling out this template? Why am I doing this? Why am I at this meeting, right? And so I always am trying to challenge myself and working with my stakeholders on that. And, even in my current role, it's evolved, right? Like, so I got in, it's how do we stand this up? Some of the good steering committees were working well, and some of them were not. They're turning into like just a status up readout, not a more of a decision making forum and prioritization discussion. And so it's working with the key leaders on one. We all, at least in my organization, we all know the structure is valuable. I'm not selling that anymore. Like everyone agrees that it's how do we fine tune it to really have the right discussions with the right people at the right frequency, not overkill. So fine tuning that with my peers, and then how do you prioritize? Like those are the two biggest things that are my pain points in my current role right now, right? Which is using those forums, okay, and right sizing them. So I guess to answer your question is I don't come at it from a check the box project management standpoint. I'm always looking at it from just a business standpoint of how, plain English. Are we having the right discussions with the right people at the right time? What's, some of the templates to drive consistency and structure are just more for consistency of communication and for the teams to think about their work in the right way, right? And being flexible along the way, being flexible with learning and adapting to the audience and what works and what doesn't work, I think it's what's valuable, at least from a role like I have.
No, absolutely. And we talked about kind of the two of the big rocks, I think, causing suboptimal strategy execution capabilities over the years, or why the needle hasn't moved that much, right? Does C-suite understand what it is? Are they committed to, make it imperative and drive that change top down through the creation of a enterprise function that's going to define the right operating model to do that? The second one, it takes a village, right? We got to bring together all the different functions that ultimately got to play well in the sandbox together to get things done, right? And the last, by no means least, relates to the kind of methodologies or frameworks or governance models or structure, right? Often we rely on kind of one size fits all approaches, right? Which fit no one. And I think the reality is that the reason it fails is because that operating model that needs to be designed to unite all the functions needs to be heavily personalized to the culture, the idiosyncrasies, the politics of your particular organization, right? And so what works for you at organizations you've worked in the past may not work for you in your next organization you work in. What's your thoughts on that?
Here's how I think about it this way, is that the elements are the same no matter where you go. You need to have some basic structure. You need to have some basic governance, and you need to have those discussions and ensure clarity and alignment, top to bottom. That's how it works. And that's what we're solving for, right? How you apply those basics have to be tailored to your organization and what works and what doesn't work. Absolutely right. There's different cultures operate in different ways. I've worked in a variety of different organizations where the cultures are completely different, and you have to kind of take a pulse on the culture and how much structure and discipline and how they think about it, and really how to flex. I think the other thing that I'm going to go back to is, I went to it before, but it's just like everybody's interpretation of strategy, and that's another challenge that it's never ending. So one of the biggest things, that I think probably everybody faces, especially in this kind of role, is the distinction between strategic work and regular work, right? I think it's important that how do I say this? Everybody wants their work to be strategic. The teams that are working on strategic work all have, I call it day job work, or just keep your lights on work, right? Mm-hmm. And what ends up happening is, especially down at that L2 or L3 level, where, hey, the teams that are kind of driving this work stream or that work stream are also doing, I'm building a marketing program for blah, 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 right? Or something. Is that a strategic activity and a milestone, or is that your day job? And so a lot of times, many organizations don't have like, oh, there's just this carved out or group of people that are only doing this work. It's the same people doing the regular work they would do, as well as the people that are doing the strategic and transformational work. And sometimes that line gets very blurred, and it's very challenging to separate those two buckets from a prioritization standpoint. And it's part of it's a never ending, I would say, staying disciplined on that. And then
Right.
also it's
I think
hard to the prioritization issue of deploying strategy becomes a challenge when everything gets lumped into the bucket.
no, I think you raise a great point. Right? I remember months back when we were working with in the community to say, look, if we're going to make strategy execution a C-suite imperative, right, we better first define what it is, right? Because as we've already discussed, like people will view strategy execution differently based on their role, their function, whatever, right? And I don't have the full definition to hand, right? But one sort of key thing that we focused on was the need to align all activity and spend with strategy, right? Both the operational as well as the strategic or discretionary, however you want to position that,
Yeah.
and that's huge, right? Because when you think about that, an overall operating budget, right? I mean, uh, whatever number you want to put it, 70-80% of that is going to be on kind of operational activity and spend, and the rest on the strategic activities or discretionary activity and spend. And it's more than just someone doing what they're doing for their day job, right? It's ensuring that the whole operating fabric or blueprint or architecture of your
Yeah.
business is aligned with the strategy too. And I think that's often overlooked, right? Because when we talk about that enterprise function, right, we
Yeah.
often start thinking about the strategic initiatives and the project work and the whatever else, right? But it's as important, and that's where the village comes in, to have an understanding of your current architecture and your operating fabric or blueprint, however you want to refer to that, and ensure that that is being optimized and moving in the right direction relative to your strategy as well. And it goes back to your point of translation of strategy, not just down into initiatives, but into how do I evolve everything this organization does? Because if your operating fabric is not optimized, it's the equivalent of dragging an anchor, right? I mean, it's going to impede your execution. And I
Yeah,
think this
I
is
could I could attest to that.
I think this is the challenge. No, not trying to put words in your mouth, but this is the challenge that I think you see, because we see in organizations today that enterprise function exists, right? In some, right? There's a transformation office, it's a change management office, it's an EPMO, it's a whatever. Add your name here. It doesn't necessarily matter, right? But often they've kind of been reactively created, and they have sort of one key focus in mind based on how they were established, right? It's an EPMO, so we're going to make sure we manage the programs successfully, or it's a big transformation office that was established to focus on one big transformation of some sort, right?
Yeah.
Maybe there's a function that's been established because there's financial issues in the organization. You're looking at cost optimization or cost rationalization to improve bottom line, right? So there's a focus on the overhaul of the operating model with cost optimization in mind. So architecture is top of mind. The reality is it's all of those things, right? But that enterprise function, in my mind, needs to be motivated or geared to one thing, and that is value erosion. How do I reclaim value, or how do I maximize and accelerate the value across everything we're doing in terms of improving our ability to execute at the operational layer as well as the strategic layer?
I I think something that just you triggered it in what you were saying is we talked about this a while ago on one of our conversations around FP&A and
Mm-hmm.
how it intersects with this work. And I think one of the things in my journey was, you just take a whole step back, right? Not even from like cascading these things into work streams, but it's really about how that strategy translation piece. And then once you really have translated these things into big buckets, how are you resourcing and funding those things and prioritizing them? And a lot of times they don't. It's not prescriptive or deliberate right off the top. We've identified these bodies of work. we're architecting them and cascading these things down into initiatives and work streams and projects. And then we build business cases from the bottom up. And then we have to prove out and sell like these little pieces, right? Instead of saying, hey, at the top, this thing, I need these people for 2 years and $3 million to go do this. Some organizations do that. Many organizations don't. And I think that's another, deliberate question that organizations need to ask themselves are, you make a strategy and you create a strategy plan, but how are you really, where in the process are you funding and resourcing this? At the top, at the beginning, or downstream, and everyone just arguing about money from the bottom of the barrel. Like, I need this, and we're all arguing about it, right? And so I've seen two different approaches, and it's just another factor to consider in the whole approach to strategy execution.
I mean, we actually just released a guide, research note of this through the forum that was saying because ultimately what you were talking about here in terms of mastering strategy execution is the evolution of your top-down planning processes to align all activity and spend with strategy and continuously optimize that to drive the right results, right? So we talked about three what seem like linear but they're not approaches. Project driven, which is kind of what you kind of defined, where strategy is loosely set in an annual planning mode, right? And then projects are teed up from the bottom and mapped in. Their business cases are created and mapped into the strategy, and then you use semi-sophisticated techniques to prioritize, optimize, and come up with the right mix of work. Now, you think of that as a top-down planning technique. It's not. You were just selecting the best of whatever has been presented, and oftentimes you can game the system by exaggerating how much your work will support the strategy in hand, right? So project-driven, right? So it's bottom-up more than top-down and supports annual planning pretty well. A lot of organizations still do that today, right? And these names are irrelevant, but moving to initiative-driven, like you alluded to, you should be able to start with the strategy, decompose the strategy throughout the organization, obviously set the metrics, and from there you end up with the actionable work. The work is derived directly from the translation and decomposition of that strategy. So from the get-go that you have the right work to move the needle on the metrics and association with the strategy. You just don't know when you can do it all, right? I mean, there's going to be some capacity issues.
That's kind of the one that's the one I'm in right now. That's my current model, which is we have a very good structured and decomposition, but it's the prioritization issue and the funding issue like that we haven't been intentional or declarative on. Yeah, and that's where I was going.
Yeah, but I think that it's always amazed me for years, right? Do you really need heavy prioritization? Yes, you need to understand your capacity of your organization when you can do things, but if you are deriving the work directly from what you say is important, the strategy, then prioritization becomes less important simply because in the previous mode, right, prioritization was important because you had a wish list of candidates that were all competing with one another, right? If you prioritize the strategy, then you kind of have direct prioritization by breaking down the work from the strategy. But no, when you compare project-driven and initiative-driven, right, you're moving from bottom-up to top-down, but you're also then moving from annual planning to a recurring continuous planning framework. But because you're focused still more on the initiatives and projects, etc., you really only got a handle on the discretionary activity and spend, right? So you need to now get the handle on how all activity and spend, the operational activity and spend. So we move to an enterprise-driven approach, right, which introduces business and enterprise architecture alongside strategic.
No, I absolutely understand where you're going.
Yeah, and then you get that whole picture, right? So you derive the work from the strategy, but you can assess it against the architectural blueprint. You can align your target stake architecture with what you need to deliver on the strategy, and that produces a transformation roadmap aligned with the strategy, right? So you're optimizing your operation activity spend with the strategy at the same time your discretionary. And now, out of left field project demand from the project-driven approach can be assessed against strategy, can be assessed against architecture for its viability and its fit. So, I mean, to me, that's in essence what everything we're doing at the forum is going to be: how do we build, a cohesive operating model to build the right top-down planning technique to master strategy execution?
Right. I got into this and evolved into this from, I was a BI metrics guy, way back. And, I kept always looking for more and bigger. And how does this all come together? That's just how does everything come together? And at the end of the day, it's, Everyone's trying to optimize the money that we have and the people, that we have to go after those two big buckets, right? It's how do we continue to do what we're doing and maybe do it better, which is the CI part, and then how do we go after that other bucket that we're saying, right? It's all the same bucket of money and people though. So a lot of organizations keep those separate and they're detangled. And I think that's where you're going is it can be separate. It's suboptimal to keep them separate though. In a perfect world, you're drawing on the same resources and money pool, and you have to be intentional from the top of like, what are we carving out for this? What are we carving out for that? And how are we going to execute on this and that, especially with the money part of it and the investment part of it. And it's not always driven that way. Money is really driven by the FP&A and the FP&A planning process. And then, strategy is driven by the strategy office. And I think that's where I was trying to say to you before, where it really comes together is when those two processes are so intertwined. Like the annual planning and financial planning process is completely in lockstep with the strat planning process. And they're all interlinked with the capital plan and the funding plan of here's my things I'm going after. You have the three-year look, but then you lock it down for the next year or however you're spending. Some people maybe do a quarterly, whatever, but you're mapping the money to the work in a continuous, systematic way. And that's where
Yeah.
there's tons of room for improvement across the board.
And that's why we kind of intentionally picked in the forum that say that we need to integrate and optimize 5 critical capabilities to master the art and science of strategy execution and achieve the 10 principles, right? Which are strategic portfolio management, business and enterprise architecture. So I know that, all my investments are, aligned with the strategy. FP&A, so we can really pressure test this from a financial point of view and ensure that we can assess and align all dollars with, or whatever, all the spend with the strategy itself, right? Obviously, project execution, because that's important. We've got to execute now and deliver the results. And change management, which again leads me to my next question. We talk about the art and science of mastering strategy execution. The science is whatever frameworks, methodologies, or plays as we use as part of the playbook. The art, in my mind, is the human dimension, right? And you already mentioned earlier, though, some people might try and circumnavigate the process because they're A-types or whatever. How important is the overcoming the human dimension or the human obstacle in mastering the art of strategy execution?
It's probably one of the most important pieces. How I would say it is, at least in my feedback and my career path, I think it's my personality that allows me to kind of go through this because in my roles, you get a lot of flack, you get no glory, and then you get some behind the scenes, like they know this couldn't have been done without you. You're in the trenches with a lot of tension a lot of times, a lot of misalignment a lot of times, and you're trying to bridge the gap, not only just like on following the strategy framework, but it's also trying to move a strategic body of work forward, right? Like you're trying to help broker that and that misalignment. And so you're doing both, right? And it's definitely an art. I don't know if there's like a magic answer. I think my skill set is just always trying to I'm able to be adaptive and kind of be a chameleon and be able to be like, if I'm in the IT world, I understand how IT people think and talk. If I'm in the marketing world or sales world, I understand how they think. And so trying to always think about it from their perspective and where they're coming from, and then try to like bring them back a little bit. So that's how I try to navigate communication. It's a never ending battle. It's a struggle. It's never, when you're in an enterprise function, it's dealing with all the functions from everyone from sales to tax, right? Those are a lot of different personalities, and you're one of the only few people that are working across all those dimensions, right? And having to communicate across all those different perspectives and personality types. I think just, again, trying to adapt your communication to their personality or their perspective. That's one thing I try to do. The other thing is persistence and perseverance. And that's what I think a lot of people after a while, understand that, my role in my past too, you get a lot of they say, I don't know how you do your job. Your job's so hard. I could never do your job. And I think it takes a certain personality type to be able to go into those, just kind of like be real and candid and say it like it is in a way. But there's the art of how you say it, right? You're definitely being a diplomat. And I think a lot of people, especially coming from like a PMO type role, like myself, they're so focused on like following this rigid process and following, I've got this framework, they have to follow it kind of thing, where I'm like, I know my framework and principles and the structure, but it's how do I adapt it to them too, and tailor it to them. And that's my approach. And I think that's also helpful. And none of it's perfect though. Dealing with the human obstacle is definitely the hardest part though, right? And especially at this level, because you're not only dealing with the alphas, like I said, but you're dealing with very many different perspectives. And some people are very structured, disciplined people that like it. And then there's some, especially the commercial organizations, right? You're trying to bring commercial sales guys to a structured approach and operations. Supply chain, these guys are process improvement guys, very disciplined process, structured. Sales guys, sell, go do it. I just do it, right? And so it's bringing those kinds of mindsets together at the right level of structure. It's what I try to do. Is I call it the minimum viable framework. Is everyone still has that autonomy and not telling them how to, I'm not going to tell a senior vice president how to run their meeting or job, but it's trying to take it and drive some consistency across the different functions the best I can. And so I don't know if that answers your question. It doesn't. There's no perfect answer to it, except I think being aware of their perspective and really trying to adapt yourself to the audience and to the functional like groups you're dealing with.
No,
I would say the two things.
it's a great answer, and it's an area that I'm not an expert in, right? And I think the sort of human dimension of this, the human psychology in terms of the motivation, getting commitment to want to play ball, and all to be excited to be pulling in the right direction, is something we're going to delve into in the forum and elevate it alongside the importance of the frameworks, right, or the plays that form part of this. So maybe not to keep you much longer, maybe wrapping up on the last question, right? I mean, what do you see? I don't know, 3 to 5 years. What do you see are the next key trends in terms of the strategy execution space?
Well, I think some of the trends that have been occurring is great for this discussion in regards to, I think there's been actual identification by the C-suite in companies that there is a gap in this area and this jobs to be done, if you will, right? There was a certain level of jobs to be done, I think, that were assumed by executives and leaders that we have the strategy, now just go do it. And I think they realized when things kept not happening, or there was tension or frustration. I think a common themes have bubbled up across corporate America, right? That there's somebody or there's some role or some thing that needs to happen to get better at helping us deploy our strategies across an organization. And so I think there has been an identification in that, and I think you see that in the number of roles that companies are putting out there, in whether it's at the enterprise level or even at the BU level, but it's mostly around that cross-functional scope of a transformation office, a strategy management office, an enterprise PMO, whatever you want to call it. I think that's been a trend, and a trend that's continuing to happen in the right direction. I think as well, there's from a process and tool standpoint, I think there's been a big gap. I'm a big process before tool guy with anything. But when it comes to this space, most of the tools that manage this kind of work aren't aligned to what the jobs to be done are necessarily. And I think they're starting to catch up. And what I mean by that is a lot of PPM tools that have happened are more project management based or bottoms up based platforms that are just more following the project management discipline rather than the executive level management of strategy and strategic programs, and then having more of a top down approach that makes sense that most people are managing in PowerPoint and Excel today. And I'm seeing a lot more platforms catch up to help manage the right level of content at the right levels, right? You're not managing project management details at the 50,000 foot level or 75,000 foot level. You're managing strategic intent or kind of KPIs, or what are your decomposed L3s, or what, you know what I mean? It's kind of, or high level milestones, not tactical Gantt charts and things like that. And so I see a lot of movement to help facilitate, a lot of movement in the software space to help really bridge that gap, but there's still a ton of work to do. I mean, I've over even the past 24 months looked at different platforms to help us manage, and it's still there's so many disconnects in what we're trying to do versus what the tool can do itself. And so I think there's definitely a trend in the right direction, and there's still a gap. And I think there's another big gap too, and what some of the things we're trying to solve for with our forum and our group is how do we standardize the way we talk about this stuff, right? We're trying to. There's a push in the industry, but there's still a huge disconnect around. Even I'll go on LinkedIn, and you will today, and you'll see the same thing labeled 5 different ways when it comes to transformation office, strategy management office, enterprise management. When you look at, under the hood, they're trying to say the same thing, but there's definitely a difference in the way it's being presented. And even us internally discussing with our own group of experts in this committee that you founded, you know, the intent and the spirit is there, but the way we articulate it is still we're sorting through, right? And I think that is a whole across this area of focus in the industry is there's still a ways to go, but it's a trend. We're actually talking about it. People understand it now, and we're trying to formalize it, such as, there's formal disciplines around process management, even around project management, but there's no standard around strategy execution management, right? It's very ad hoc and loosely defined, and I think smart people understand that, and we're coming together to share our thoughts and how do we have a common approach, at least, right, to this gap in this area of focus in corporate America. And that's not even just corporate America, in any large organization, government, it could be anything, right? It's the same.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's kind of my 2 cents.
That's interesting, right? Because we could say, look, AI. I mean, obviously, AI is a key trend, but you echo some of the. You said it slightly differently, but echo some of the thoughts of past guests that say, listen, I mean, the trend is that maybe this is going to become mainstay now, right? I mean, it's been threatening to be a critical discipline for organizations, but really now maybe it will become a discipline that has the backing and support and commitment of the C-suite to actually make it a reality through their organization, right? And I think you're right. The challenge then will be how to unify that village and make that operating model actually productive within an organization. Cool. Well, Lou, really appreciate you taking the time to talk with us today. I look forward to seeing you on some of the upcoming community meetings. I'm sure we'll get back in this medium again sometime soon.
No, I appreciate it. I love talking about it. It's a passion of mine. And again, appreciate your leadership in pulling all of us together and creating these forums for us to share ideas and our war stories.
Great. We'll see you in the next one.
All right.